Welcome everyone to today's Academic Explainer. We're diving into a really fascinating historical investigation today, looking at the life, the legend, and the lasting legacy of the Sufi saint Shah Jalal. But we're not just looking at the man himself. We're using his story to trace the much broader spread of Islam into the Bengal region. Now, for those of you studying Sufi history, you already know how tricky this can be, right? The lines between hard historical reality and glowing hagiographical myth can get pretty blurry. So in this explainer, we're going to carefully dissect his life. We'll track his incredible journey all the way from the Middle East to South Asia and examine the profound, permanent impact he left on the religious landscape of Bengal. All right, let's jump right in. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the origins debate, then look at his Sufra-Dia connection. From there, we'll follow what's known as the journey of soil, break down the conquest of Sylhet, meet the companions of the mission, and finally, ground everything with Ibn Battuta's first-hand observations. So, part 1, the origins debate. Where did Shah Jalal actually come from? You know, one of the absolute most compelling things about studying medieval historical figures is trying to piece together their origins. And Shah Jalal, well, he presents us with quite the historiographical mystery. Just take a look at this timeline of the source material. He passed away in 1346, but look at the gaps. We don't see anything until roughly 1505, during the reign of Sultan Alauddin Hussein Shah, when an inscription pops up referring to him with the suffix kunyai. After that, we literally have to wait until 1571 for a biography called Sharh Nuzhat al-Arwah, which is the first to claim a Turkestan origin. And get this, the most popular narrative today, the idea that he was Yemeni, wasn't formally written down into a full biography, the Suhail Yemen, until 1859. We are dealing with a massive 2-century gap between his death and the very first written texts trying to pin down his roots. So, how do scholars handle this? Well, it's led to 2 competing theories. We basically have 2 totally conflicting academic theories about his birthplace. On one side, we have the incredibly popular Yemeni legend. Based on local ballads, devotees, and those 19th century texts, this theory ties him to the Hadramaut region in Greater Yemen. In fact, some scholars even suggest that kunya ayi suffix might be a direct link to a village called Kanina in Yemen. But on the other side, we have an older text. That 1571 biography was actually written by a descendant of one of Shah Jalal's senior companions, and it claims he was born in Turkestan. Not only that, it says he was a spiritual disciple of the famous Sufi mystic Ahmed Yassawai. It's a really striking contrast, isn't it? It's just a perfect textbook example of how historical memory gets constructed and reshaped over centuries. Moving on to part 2, the Suhrawardia connection and his early education. Now, regardless of where he was actually born, the historical sources do converge on his early spiritual education in Mecca. After his father died, Shah Jalal was raised by his maternal uncle, a really prominent cleric named Syed Ahmad Kabir Saraudi, and under his uncle, he didn't just casually study, he completely excelled. He became a hafiz, he mastered Islamic jurisprudence, and he sought out a life of deep, solitary prayer. The crucial takeaway here is that Shah Jalal achieved what's known in Sufism as kamaliyat, spiritual perfection. And let me tell you, that doesn't just happen overnight. It was achieved after 30 long years of intense, rigorous study, practice, and meditation. This really shows us the immense theological preparation he underwent before he ever even thought about setting foot in South Asia. As he eventually started journeying eastward from the Arabian Peninsula, all of that vast theoretical and spiritual knowledge was formally recognized. When he reached Uch over in the Punjab region, he and several of his companions were officially initiated into the Suhrawardia Sufi order. This was a big deal. It gave a formal, institutional framework to his ongoing spiritual mission. All right, part 3, a journey of soil. So how exactly did he know where he was supposed to go? Well, the historical texts give us this absolutely brilliant narrative metaphor. The story goes that before he left Mecca, his uncle gave him a literal handful of soil. The specific instruction was, settle where the soil matches exactly in smell and color. I mean, wow, right? That fundamentally frames his entire expedition. This wasn't just some random guy wandering around, it was a destined, divine quest. He was carrying a physical piece of his spiritual foundation, using it as a divine compass to find a new home to spread dawah, the call to Islam. But we also have to look at the broader historical forces at play here, because the year 1258 is absolutely pivotal. Shah Jalal's journey eastward was also heavily propelled by catastrophic real-world events. He actually passed through Baghdad and was present there during the horrific Mongol invasion of 1258. That was the invasion that saw the murder of the last Abbasid caliph. So, driven off by this totally world-shattering instability, the eastward movement of his entourage was just as much about finding a safe haven as it was about fulfilling a spiritual mandate. Which brings us to Part 4, the conquest of Sylhet, and the major clash in Bengal in 1303. Okay, here is where we need to shift our lens from a quiet, ascetic journey to some hard, empirical military history. The regional escalation all starts when Sheikh Burhanuddin, a Muslim living in Sylhet under the Hindu king Govinda, sacrificed a cow to celebrate the birth of his newborn son. King Govinda viewed this as a massive sacrilege and reacted with just extreme cruelty, having the newborn killed and Burhanuddin's hand severed. Word of this reaches Sultan Shamsuddin Faraz Shah of Lucknow, who immediately sends an army. But here's the kicker. The Sultan's forces suffered 3 successive failed strikes. The Bengali armies just weren't experienced in that terrain, and Govinda's military strategy was completely superior. But then finally, Shah Jalal and his companions arrive on the scene. Whether they were explicitly summoned by the Sultan or were just fighting independently at first, their arrival fundamentally tipped the scales. The combined Muslim forces launched a 4th attack, completely defeating Govinda and bringing Sylhet under Muslim control. And this is where it all comes together. The historical narrative brilliantly ties this gritty military conquest right back to his spiritual quest. Because following the battle, tradition states that the victorious battlefield of Sylhet was exactly the place where that sacred soil finally matched. The divine compass had found its true north. Part 5. Companions of the Mission. Now, it's absolutely crucial to remember that Shah Jalal did not accomplish this monumental feat alone. He was supported by a highly dedicated force of 360 companions. And just look at the diversity and specific expertise of this group. You've got Shah Paran, his own nephew, who joined all the way from the Arabian Peninsula. You've got Sheikh Shashni Pir, who essentially acted as the expedition's pedologist. He was the designated soil tester, constantly checking the local earth against the handful given by Jalal's uncle. Then there's Sayyid Nasruddin, a crucial military commander, Haji Yusuf, whom Jalal would later appoint as the guardian of his dargah, and incredibly, Sheikh Ali, an ex-prince of Yemen who literally gave up his royal duties to join this expedition. This wasn't a ragtag group. This was a highly organized, multidisciplinary mission. But how did Shah Jalal actually live after pulling off this massive military victory? Well, let's look at the title that was postfixed to his name, Al-Mujarrad. It means ascetic or secluded. Despite the massive geopolitical shift he just helped engineer in Sylhet, Shah Jalal transitioned almost immediately from a military victor right back to a secluded religious leader. He returned to his solitary prayers and a super minimalist lifestyle, devoting his later years entirely to propagating Islam in the region. Finally, Part 6. Ibn Battuta's observations from 1345. To really understand this later period of his life, we can rely on the incredibly objective primary source lens of the famous traveler Ibn Battuta. In 1345, Ibn Battuta made a grueling 1-month journey straight through the mountains just to meet him. And when he finally arrived, this is what he wrote down. He was tall and lean, and lived by the mosque in a cave, where his only item of value was a goat he kept for milk, butter, and yogurt. I mean, think about that for a second. That is the grounded, stark reality of the man beneath centuries of towering military myth. Here is a man of hoary age, highly revered, guiding the masses, yet possessing absolutely nothing of material wealth but a single goat. Shortly after that amazing historical meeting with Ibn Battuta, Shah Jalal passed away on March 15, 1346. He was buried right there in Sylhet, where his shrine remains a major focal point for devotees today, having profoundly and permanently altered the religious landscape of Bengal. So, as students of history, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Does the myth of the legendary conqueror obscure the reality of the humble ascetic? We've looked at the 30 years of deep theological study, the sheer military might that crushed an established kingdom, and the quiet man living in a cave with a goat. It really challenges us to critically evaluate exactly how we construct the histories of our religious figures. Which version of Shah Jalal is the most true? Well, I'll leave that up to you to debate. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it leaves you eager to dig even deeper into the primary sources.